I might be irritating the cameraman just standing up for 1 second. I can do it anyway. Thank you for the introduction. We tried to make it very short, this long topic for the panel, so that's what you're seeing up here. But it's correct that we will be covering other aspects, so like impact of new EU regulations, impact of technology on clinical trials, of course, in this context, discussing the importance or what role does clinical trials have in building and sustaining the industry here, as some of the aspects, and also touching a little on the differences in the way that clinical trials maybe are practiced in different countries. So, but I would like to introduce my panelists here, and we have 3, in my mind, very interesting panelists. When everybody has run through their introduction, you'll see on the screen, hopefully, a picture of each of them and a bit more description, if they don't cover it themselves. That's really great. My phone's ringing. Sorry about that. But I would like to first introduce Britta Smedegaard Andersen. Britta is the project director of NEXT. NEXT stands for National Experimental Therapy Partnership. And the NEXT, just mentioning the names first, beside her is Heiko. Heiko is the CEO of the Hannover Clinical Trial Center. And next to Heiko is Jan. And Jan is the founder and managing director of a company called mediq Innovation Experts. So 3 very different panelists with different experiences, different views. So I definitely encourage you also, the audience, to think about questions you might have for them during the course of our discussion. I like to call Britta for the private-public partnership facilitator, and I'm sure in a moment you'll see why. And Heiko for the very experienced researcher, especially with a lot of hands-on experience. And Jan, the consultant, and much more, and you'll see why in a moment. So over to you, Britta, and welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm heading, at the moment, it's in fact a project in Denmark supported by the Danish government. We have got funding from what is called the Innovation Fund in Denmark for 5 years. So that means we have been around for 2.5 years now, and we have halfway left. The partnership has got a great start. It's actually gathering together the whole healthcare sector in Denmark, meaning we're working with clinical trials in the hospitals, and everything we're doing is around national collaboration across hospitals, and it's about making the Danish hospital area as a very attractive partner for industry to place early clinical trials in the Danish hospitals. So it's a real public-private partnership, and I'm a real facilitator of having these 2 major interests growing into one, you can say. I think it's going to be a infrastructure in Denmark in the future in the way we're collaborating between hospital and industry, because it works and both parties are extremely happy. And I think we have a chance to beat some other countries in this global, you can say it's a global challenge to attract clinical trials from industry to small countries as we are here in the Nordic area. So we need to be a very special partner to be preferred when industry looks out globally where to place specific clinical trials. So what I would like to give you here, and we can maybe discuss, is that what is needed to have a successful public-private partnership. And these 4 boxes on the slide is what I think is really what you need to succeed in and what you need to put together. So to be a real collaborator, you must be committed on the collaboration over time. So that means you have some goals, you have some time to manage around meeting the goals. So the goals need to be also common, to be able to share your good ideas to move to the same area or direction, and to have the common results. And that is in this partnership to attract clinical trials to hospitals and to give the patients a better possibility of new treatments. So what is needed is the box to the lower right, is that we share the resources and that we share our time. So to be successful in that, these three words after the first bullet here is what I count as really what matters. You need to be clear on governance, you need to be accountable. Each party must put in their resources and be really accountable in the way you collaborate. And then we need to show performance. If we're not performing, if we're not recruiting the patients in the clinical trials, we are not going to have the next trial coming in from industry. So that's one of our primary focus area, that is to be predictable. This is my last slide, and that simply covers, I think in one slide, what is Next all about. You can see, as I said in the beginning, we're working in a national perspective. That means each hospital must see themselves as a partner in the Danish infrastructure, not only as a single hospital. So we work around referring patients between hospitals, finding the right sites for the right kind of trial. We also move in the direction of precision medicine, as we know that's going to be the major rule, finding the right patients to the right medication in the future. And we have set up a network of bioinformaticians supporting the trials in Denmark, which are going on in oncology and hematology. So besides oncology and hematology, we cover dermatology, respiratory diseases, and infectious diseases. And as I said, it's early phase, so that means it's going from first in man until phase 2. And that is because we see we have a possibility, again, as a very well-structured small country. We have a lot of registers, we know where the patients are, and we are very easy to collaborate with. And we are highly skilled, the staffing is highly educated. That means the hospitals they are a good partner to be in this heavy part of clinical trials, which is the early phase trials. Yeah.
Thank you, Britta. We hand on to Heiko.
Okay. So thank you, Birgitta, for the introduction. Let's see. That's yours.
Yeah, that's just my homepage where you can go and visit the partnership. Sorry.
So by introducing myself, I want to show you this slide where we actually have established a sort of public-private partnership. So I'm trained as a cardiologist, internal medicine, worked at Hannover Medical School and University of Hamburg, then worked for 4 years at Stanford University, 1 year actually also as a faculty member. We developed a very interesting gene transfer method for treating restenosis in cardiovascular diseases. With that, I went into biotechnology industry, had several executive positions in the industry, in biotech companies focusing on gene therapy, on tissue engineering, and on DNA medicine. And eventually I thought, because we quite often work together with academic partners, I wanted to found an academic clinical research institute, and I did this together with the Hannover Medical School and a economic development agency in the Hannover region, Hannover Impulse. They also attending this 37 Celsius degree meeting today. And what we do, we actually interacting closely with the medical school. We do all kinds of clinical trials. We have a team of 40 people and have a turnover of around 2.5 million euros a year. And we do clinical trials in all aspects that you can imagine: tissue engineering, gene therapy, DNA medicine, oncology, medical devices. And to set the stage in this discussion, I just want to remind you on 3 different major cornerstones of clinical research. One is when we do clinical trials, in the first step, we do efficacy trials. Does it really work what we want to do in randomized controlled trials? The second step is the effectiveness. We test the question, does it really help? We do this in a non-homogeneous patient group, and those are the typical healthcare studies. And lastly, we do efficiency trials. The question is, how much benefit do we really get for the budget that we are investing? Those are population-based studies and so-called health technology assessments. The other cornerstone I want to mention briefly is the aspect of multinational trials. I'm really a fan of multinational trials. This is depicting the industry-sponsored international trials, and those are the non-industry academic trials. You can clearly see there's a lot of research on an international basis in the industry. Unfortunately, only very little in the academic field. This is, of course, due to the complexity of the trials and due to costs. Up to now, it was really difficult to do international clinical trials in Europe. 27, actually right now still 28 member states with different national regulations, a lot of costs, a lot of effort to do clinical trials. But now we have, and I'm really a fan of those harmonized new regulations. We have the 536/2014 regulation harmonizing the clinical trials in Europe in terms of medicinal products. And since very recent, actually almost last week, we have the new medical device regulation and also a in vitro diagnostic regulation, which basically brings us to the point that we have the same law for conducting clinical trials in all European countries. And this is really a major change in paradigm. We have a supranational approval procedure, one unique application dossier in English. The action by competent authority and ethics committee is together in one decision, an electronic application. It's fixed, reliable timelines and a simple fee structure. This is really a major step forward, and we are very much looking for that. And what do we gain with this international partnership? We have access to more patients, faster results, statistical power, access to medical expertise. We can unlock scientific potential. We can share best evaluation practice, raise methodology standards. This is very important, avoid duplication of clinical research. We share costs for a better generalizability of our results and for a faster, broad implementation of our clinical research. So that's for the introduction. Jan?
Thank you very much, Heiko. My name is Jan Wende, and I'm the founder, as I was introduced, and managing director of mediq Innovation Experts. A bit more than the consultant, in the past 11 years we have built what we call a life science hub, where part of this, what defines us is, first of all, the clinical validation, business strategy, but also sales strategy. The background is the following. The family was involved in a medical device distribution company specializing on innovation. And from early days onwards, I could see the challenge of innovations trying to enter the market and trying to challenge the gold standard. Focus countries were not primarily Germany to source the technology, but mainly the United States, Israel, and Korea, which are known as innovation hubs and dynamic drivers of innovations, but having the challenge to enter the EU with a lot of questions. So me, with a background in business administration and non-medical devices and non-clinical, were facing the same challenges as those innovations, to understand the unmet needs of the end users, to understand the regulatory situation, reimbursement trends, and ultimately how to position technology within this environment. So I was actually forced from day one to reach out and partner up with hospitals. Today, mediq operates and cooperates with 60 clinics in Germany, including all leading university hospitals, accompanied by senior consultants. Till 3 years ago, I was the youngest guy in the company. The rest came from strong industry and consulting background and companies. By now, we have passed on and training and educating much smarter, much younger people than I am. And basically the concept is driving innovation forward and giving it a hub to develop on the clinical side, as I said before, but in parallel to this optimizing process to demonstrate the socioeconomic benefit, because the challenge for innovation is not only to demonstrate the benefit and advantage to the medical users, but to third-payer parties, GPOs, insurance companies, and therefore we developed a wonderful concept of actually understanding not only the healthcare ecosystems in the theory, but also hands-on, going into the hospitals, working together with the experts on product design, usability, defining clinical trial protocols, and what has become important today in an economized healthcare system, to point out the economic benefit that the innovation, even if more expensive in sourcing, but through optimization and through medical benefits, overall reduces the costs for the healthcare system, but also the individual hospitals. Today we have 120 doctors, professors, nurses, and medtech experts who support and help us to build this strong case. The advantage is the companies entering and innovations entering through mediq, whether small startups but also multinationals, Philips, Kimberly-Clark, are now customers from mediq, because we understand how really to give innovation the platform and to develop and nurse it. And one important component also is, I heard this before, using and transforming university hospitals or hospitals in general into beta testing site. That means failure is part of the design and development process. And ultimately, the goal is with a design of the unmet needs, training and education materials, but also, as I said, to demonstrate the economic benefit. So this slide should only quickly show the difference of processes in between the gold standard and what can be reached out by innovation. I just presented two small examples to make it a bit more visible. This is a study combined with the University Hospital of Würzburg, post-operative pain management. All the colorful spots you see on one side, the scientific part of the study was to compare patient-controlled analgesia in a continuous way against a discontinuous way through a pump. The gold standard, you see all the spots from the anesthesia room over to the units and wards in rescue situations. And by doing the cost-benefit analysis, sitting in the hospital, understanding the streamlines, understanding the working hours, the used material, the hospital still didn't believe that paying amount X for the innovation would benefit them. So what we did in the cost-benefit analysis as well is, in parallel to the clinical trial, showing and highlighting to the hospital with a process, optimized process, what the actual savings are. So in this context, for 100 euros investment, the hospital saved 350 euros per patient and released the nurses from pressure on their time and quality. Since this is one of the standards, how we also market the opportunity to multinationals, because these beta testing sites at a certain point transform into reference sites. So while it's, and I can take the example from Israel, very hard to demonstrate the benefit within the Israeli market because of size, amount of patients, and impact, Germany and Europe provides a strong platform in order to demonstrate to the industry and to investors also the benefit of technologies. Also accompanied by Danish example for hygienic control. Denmark is one of the leaders in hygienic control inside hospitals, so we could demonstrate also in a clinical trial the setup between the German process compared to the Danish process. These materials were used for later on marketing purposes and the financial data for the insurance company to grant this innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, all three of you. So now it's my turn to ask some questions. Heiko, you said in the beginning, very enthusiastic you are about the new EU regulation in the area here. Could you put a little more detail onto, or explain a bit more maybe the benefits you see of this new EU regulation for the stakeholders in the industry? Who will it benefit and how?
Yeah, certainly. As I mentioned briefly, is that until now conducting a clinical trial in a multinational way in Europe is really difficult, because we have all the different legislations. We have it in the medicinal sector, but we also have it in the medical device sector. Now with this harmonized regulations, you can basically catch all European countries with one application. So one of the principles, I didn't go into details how it work in principle, but one detail is that the application dossier basically consists of two parts. One is the part which is general for all the population, the protocol, the documentation of the investigative medicinal device, dossier or the medical device. Then there is the other part. Part two is what is related to the patient information, local documents which need to be in the local language. When you want to go ahead with your new approach in translational medicine, for example, you can take your protocol with your new device or your new medicine to the electronic portal, submit it to 10, 12, 15 different countries in the EU, and you get a feedback immediately from all those countries, like a consorted scientific advice. And that's for the researcher, for the company, a real advantage. And on the other side, it's an advantage for the patients because you can cover a lot of countries with your new approach. And from academia, we know that, for example, clinical trials in rare diseases or in orphan diseases, they need to be conducted in an international way because in one country you don't have enough patients for that. So this is a major advantage.
Yeah, so it's a key point actually, I think at the end you're saying that often, especially for rare diseases, that if you're looking only in one country, there might not be enough patients to enter into a clinical trial. I was just thinking though that since we have both Denmark and Germany represented here, we don't have Norway in this panel specifically, but let me ask you, is there any difference if I am an international company, a life science or pharmaceutical company, is there any difference in having my clinical trials done in Germany and Denmark? Where should I go? Does it matter?
So one first question is, where do I find my patients? The second question is always, as a sponsor, you want to have, you want to own your data. So this is another question. For example, we're doing a EU-funded project, in which the coordinator is the Steno Diabetes Center in Copenhagen, together with Peter Rossing. And we are managing the clinical trial in 11 different countries. So we just take advantage that we get, and it's a clinical trial in diabetes, we just get the advantage of having a huge population of diabetic patients.
So cross-country.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you say, Britta? Because you did say in the beginning that part of the next partnership is also to attract more clinical trials to Denmark.
Yeah. Well, it's the scope of Next to be a preferable partner for industry, but we know we have the challenge because the country is very small compared to Germany, so we have much fewer patients. So I think when I have a background for 15 years in industry, carrying out clinical trials, choosing the right countries, so it depends very much, as you say, where are the patients and what kind of trial. So I think Denmark and Germany, as I see it, we are very similar what we can offer. So it will be, the majority will be the way we are organized around finding the right patients for the specific trial. And when we come to the smaller kinds of trials, as we are covering, the early phase, we don't need so many patients. So there you could easily have, for example, a site in Next where we cover the whole population, and then you could have two of the big cities in Germany, for example, when you just need a few sites. So I don't really think we compete in that respect. Of course, we do in the big setting globally, but we can offer the same way of collaborating as I see it. And if we work around being maybe partners in future, more formalized in our part of the world, because we are very similar to collaborate with, it will be even a better offer, as I see it, for industry. So we are working around starting to have maybe formalized partnerships with the other Nordic countries, and we could also go to the south, to Germany, in covering a bigger area, because that's what industry would like. Yeah. A better uptake and easier startup.
Maybe can I add a sentence? Yeah. In comparing this new system of harmonized regulation within the European Union, actually Norway and the EFTA states are associated, we will have a real advantage compared to the United States. With this new harmonized procedure, as I mentioned, we have the assessment of the documents in one phase, basically together with the competent authority and the ethics committee. Both together. You get one decision by each member state, coordinated and harmonized. In the US, you have your IND, but you have millions of IRBs, which all have different opinions and which is very complicated to coordinate. And that will be, in terms of money and time, a real advantage for Europe.
So it's time for Europe now,
yeah, absolutely,
right? Also in this context.
Maybe also
very politically, actually, right now. Time for Europe.
One comment also out of the practical experience collaborating with Israel or also Danish countries, the advantage of this combined trials also on the from the business perspective is Germany as the third largest healthcare market has an international standing and impact on strategies and development inside the industry. So leveraging on the size of Germany under the European aspect, I think provides advantages for the smaller countries as well as for the Germans, because the innovation, interesting enough, at least the 11 years I experienced, the disruptive innovations are mainly outside of Germany. So what we can provide basically is the platform and also the way how to develop this disruptive innovation to a concept, to a final commercial stage.
And you mentioned innovation, and I came to think when we were talking yesterday that your company, Jan, basically I would say is founded on innovation. It's definitely a very innovative company and a bit in the forefront since you started these 10, 11 years ago. As you mentioned, now there are a few more competitors than there used to be. Could you say a little about how does technology play a role in terms of staying innovative in the space that you're operating in?
Extremely, because ultimately it enables researchers, to drive their research, maybe new diagnostic forms, maybe new discoveries, which always need the tool of taking the example of medtech, or now even more becoming big data and digital health. It is a key driver. So it keeps, the research dynamic, but also it provides optimization processes inside the healthcare system itself, saving costs and increasing benefit to patients and also to the system itself.
Thank you. Yeah.
I can maybe add that. Sure. You need definitely more technology to, again, fit the patients into the trials in the future, because that's going to be very complicated trials. And just doing it in the old-fashioned way, looking in your medical notes as a doctor, trying to remember all the clinical trials you have ongoing, that is going to be impossible without technology in future. So I think we're working around the same technologies in bioinformaticians area, covering also going together with the clinics, and what also you're working on with IBM of looking at the big data area of how to match the medical knowledge to the right patient. So I think there's a growing need.
Very important, very good comment also. I think what's breaking down, and this is the change in the past 11 years, is the barriers and borders in between. That we now connecting also thanks to big data, but thanks to collaboration where engineers, doctors, business experts, regulatory experts all form one unit and develop the technology together. And this is, I think, the biggest impact in 11 years.
Yeah, this was going back to yesterday. Those of you yesterday, I remember that the opening pitch was focusing on also the importance of collaboration across sectors, across countries, etc. So it's an example also in clinical trials how important this is to be successful. Yesterday, I think it was Pfizer that touched on the importance of real-world data and use of that. So a question for you could interest the audience, I think, is what perspectives do you see in combining real-world data with the more traditional controlled clinical trial approach? Could one do that, and what value could it give?
Ladies first?
Yeah. Well, that is the future. The authorities, they are asking for it in future, and when you're going to have a new drug on the market, they want to know how is the real data and how is the real daily life for a patient using it, because everybody knows that when a patient is in a trial, the compliance of taking the medication is extremely high. And the feedback from the doctor comes regularly. You go for regular visits. When you are back by your GP, you are left on your own. So I think we need to be able to offer something here. And what I would like to raise is that we need to be innovative in the way to find the patients. Because these patients in real-world data area, they are with the GPs. So we need a lot of patient awareness and to have the primary sector also going active in this area.
So one approach of real-world data is another project which I can mention that's again a European-funded project together with the Institut Curie in France, where we're investigating the medical history and actually biomarker data in patients with cervical cancer. And interestingly enough, we do this in actually Western European states and also Eastern European states like Moldavia, Serbia, and Romania. We collect the medical data, the treatment data, follow-up data in terms of clinical outcome, and also protein data, histology of the tumor, DNA data, and RNA data. Everything is coming together in a big database, and now we are looking for signals, and we are developing algorithms to basically have a ground to work in another project in which we will treat patients prospectively according to the findings, genetic signatures, and so on of specific tumor entities, and trying out specific medicines in relation to specific genetic signatures. So that is sort of the combination of the real-world data in conjunction with then a prospective trial.
So last comment to add, I think socioeconomic benefit was also mentioned before, and if you look into the decision-making process of the healthcare system itself, an insurance company, obviously the real-time data or the real data is becoming of importance more and more, and is one of the cornerstones of the future, I think, of medicine and specifically reimbursement also.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how many of you might have seen that the FDA has just announced that a week or two ago a digital unit. So now, in my view, even the FDA is going to move into the digital era with artificial intelligence, etc. So it'll be interesting to see maybe what would this mean? Would it mean that in the future we'll be seeing real-world data perhaps used even in the regulation world and approval world? I don't know whether you agree or see it differently, but any comments? While you think about that, is there any questions in the audience? Because we don't have the system up anymore for SMS. So if there is any questions, we have 3 minutes left or so. Otherwise, I can ask again, but you're very welcome to ask the panel anything you might have in mind. It's great to have Oslo cluster cancer. Cancer cluster.
Thank you. Well, one question about the competitive change that was mentioned regarding Europe, an ethical committee and a centralized procedure, if you like, or a mutual recognition of decisions. In normal clinical trials, where the sponsors are medtechs or pharmas, do you think that the ethical approvals have been a boundary or a threshold that has been difficult to overcome in normal conduct of clinical trials? At least from as a hypothesis from my perspective, it hasn't been. There's been some real changes and differences regarding the serious ethical divisions regarding embryonic stem cell research, etc., that has been quite divisive. But for normal conduct of clinical trials, the ethical committees, even if it's in Asia, US, and Europe, hasn't been a rate limiting for actually the conduct. It's been other parts of the regulatory. So what is the real competitive advantage?
You're right. I mean, there are some, generalizable ethical issues that are sort of common sense. The devil is in the detail. For example, in Spain up to now, you could get the approval of the competent authority only after the ethics committee approved the trial. And at that time, this is a year ago, there were 10, 15 different ethics committees in the country working on one trial. In Germany, you have 52 ethics committees, and every ethics committee is giving its opinion on a given trial. A patient information or a protocol in one country, the ethics committee see a problem in a protocol in one country. Then you have to ask the ethics committee in the other country, do you agree with this change when we put it in? That is the problem, the interaction between all the different agencies and competent authorities in the different countries. As I mentioned, in the US, you have, every IRB has a different decision. And an IRB can have an input onto the protocol. then you're changing the protocol, you're trying to change the protocol, adapt the protocol. Then you have to go to the next IRB and ask them, are you okay with that change? And this is a continuum. And I think that is what we really save time and money.
But haven't the EU also added a lot regarding biobank legislation, tissue exports, and data privacy legislation that's really creating, you know, a fifth and a sixth hurdle for doing clinical trials? There's an increase in bureaucracy in that area that doesn't serve to EU's.
There will even, with the new regulations. I mean, I'm in favor of the harmonization and so on. I'm also in favor of transparency. The new regulations will have a lot of more transparency. The clinical data, the people who conduct the clinical trial, they were all visible for the public in the electronic database, which is being built up right now.
Maybe last comment also from the innovations perspective. If you see the amount of United States companies or US companies who go Europe first in parallel to the FDA application, this is one reason and background, and this is availability of resources and time. So CE has also, with the harmonization, it will be boosted even, from the medtech, medical devices I speak here perspective, been always the faster application process. And this provides an opportunity for all of us here together in developing also and supporting companies and innovations from the United States as well.
I'd like to ask a quick question, and it's a provocative one. So
Time's up, but you're allowed.
thank you. I'll do it quickly. Clinical trials, data, success, wonderful. Failure is viewed as a real disaster. But if we listen before to Anita's presentation, from failure one can learn a lot. Why aren't the different authorities finally forcing the release of data on failure of study, not just the top line, but the data, at least the control study, the control group gives you a lot of information. The treatment, of course, does it, but maybe it's a secret, but it will enhance fastening or whatever, forwarding the science in a very different pace. And I don't understand this issue in the environment we live now, where capital is so limited and it's so complicated to develop things.
So that is actually, if you, maybe this was just a small point, duplication of clinical trials. With the new regulations, every sponsor needs to publish the data of the clinical trial, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, whether it's, broken up because of, not enough recruitment and so on. All the data, including a lay summary, a summary which is understandable by a lay person, which is not in the field of the research, needs to be published in the new electronic portal. So every data.
And then others can use it for...
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the goal.
And I think that is growing in industry, working in that direction. But the difficulty is how to manage that entry to the data. But as I see it, that is the openness is simply the future of this.
Learning also a little bit from Israel and the hospitals there, I think what is key also for the innovation itself, them talking about medical devices or eHealth devices, and this is what we provide, or the hospitals also provide in the centers, is a controlled environment in the beta testing sites, which understand that, as it was mentioned before, failure is part of the development process in order to finalize the product.
I was the last one. Anita, you have a question? Excuse us.
Oh, sorry, yes, you were the last one.
Oh.
Yes. Okay, very quickly. Are you alluding to the clinicaltrials.gov website when you mention regarding sponsors' commitment to... No?
No, it's a new, actually one of the prerequisites for the new EU regulation both on medical devices and medicinal products, is a new portal which is being built up at the European Medicines Agency, which is a single portal in which you put all the data in for application, which is a single portal for notification, for communication with the authorities. And in that portal, you need to submit your report and also the report in lay terms. And actually all the information on the investigator is public. All the information on serious breaches within the clinical trial are then viewable for the public.
Which brings me to part.
Maybe not per patient, but for a group of patients, 10 patients. I mean, depending on the size of the trial, but the data basically. Which
brings me to part B. That's for Europe. However, Asia, Japan, India, is a way. Do pharmaceutical companies attempt to get around this by recruiting in other countries, do you believe? Or do you believe they are sincerely open about all their data?
Difficult question. What is, we have any idea on that? Asia, I mean, it's, we know the discussion on, 10, 15 years ago, everybody went to East Europe, to Russia, to India to do clinical trials because it was so easy to recruit patients. And at the end it came out that it's not that easy because it all depends on data quality. There was one major trial in heart failure recently published. The trial was named TopCat. It was a huge clinical trial on the drug of spironolactone in heart failure in the United States, in South America, and also in Georgia and Russia. The results were totally different. In North America and South America, it was a clear effect of the drug in terms of improvement of heart function. In Russia and in Georgia, there's no effect. Later on, and there is another paper then later on published on this analysis of the data, and it came out that in Russia and Georgia, they just recruited the different patients, totally different patients which at the end, when looking into the charts really, didn't really have a heart failure. They were class NYH class 1 and maybe 2. So it's all about quality, it's all about instruments, how we control the quality in other countries.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Guys, can we take 5 minutes from the lunch so people can ask more questions?
Talking about clinical trial, the question is who will sponsor? How we sponsor those clinical trials?
Can you repeat that? How the sponsors choose?
How we can who will sponsor the clinical trials?
Yeah, I mean, this is there are several options. According to the regulations, it can either be a pharmaceutical company, it can be a biotech company, it can be an academic institution, but on the other side, it can also be a private person. Basically, everybody can be a sponsor, providing that he or she has the infrastructure to supervise the trial accordingly. So having the structure for quality control, having the structure for financing, and having the structure for securing the patient safety. You agree?
Yeah, I think it could be great to see some more of the movements you see in the States where you have actually patient organizations building up finance possibilities for exactly doing some of the trials that the industry is not doing. And I think there we will have the cross-border collaborations in academia and maybe setting up new ideas of funding.
I think also where David Furst, who is one of the leaders of Israeli medtech industry, as former director of the Expert Institute, is coming from us. That's the biggest challenge, I think, for the startups is the access to capital and to the funding. And if you look into the larger, public funding projects, it's long-term processes for application, so there is a challenge in terms of time. What we identified, for instance, inside the universities, there are research budgets also from the academia side. So in order to drive forward a specific field of research, you need the application, you need the tools. So this can be in some ways combined, at least the German system offers this, that you use the innovation as a tool and as applicator for conducting the clinical trial. And this is how you can, reduce the time of acquiring the capital and drive processes forward.
But I think what is needed is that these investigator-driven studies, they must be much bigger with a much larger population, because what you see now is a lot of small clinical trials. You can't really use the data or the outcome because it's a too little number of patients.
Since there's a possibility for spending some more minutes, I just want to make a reflection, because I worked with clinical trials for 15 years in my previous life in AstraZeneca, and it's quite interesting to see that nothing has really changed since 1955, 56, when Sir Bradford Hill introduced the randomized clinical trial. And it's been surprising to see how little appetite there is in the industry to change this, because everyone knows it's slowing down the industry completely. It creates endlessly slow cycles for product approvals. It's extremely costly. Everybody knows these graphical descriptions of the terms. What we heard yesterday was an interesting debate about simulation. Now, the people on stage were from the acute medicine area, so we didn't have time to actually go into that, because this is a change that needs to be driven by industry. Industry needs to take simulation and N=1 trials for the new genetic environment that's coming, and trying to see if they can now, with the available data, do something which is, the holy grail here, and that is to find a clinical trial where simulation actually gives you the same result as in prospective clinical trials in patients. Someone needs to do that daring experiment and take a full data set, do the simulation, and then compare it to a real-life randomized trial in a patient population and show that now it's time for changing this. I suspect that the pharma companies do not want to do that, because they have a fantastic position ahead of the smaller companies, because they are the only one who can afford, going back to the question of who will pay. Yeah. So as long as they are in this hopelessly expensive game, nobody else, in particular the small companies, can get into this arena. So someone needs to have that. Let's have it on the topic for the next meeting, because it's really interesting. Someone needs to break that barrier.
Just a short remark. I mean, this is a very interesting point you're mentioning. Actually, there is a call within the European research framework on in silico trials, and we're actually in one application where we exactly do that. And it's in the field of heart valves, new heart valves, medical devices. On one part in the project, it's planned to have this in silico planning of the clinical trial on existing data. And on the other side, then comparing what we found out in silico with a real randomized clinical trial. So comparing is what we find in simulation. Do we get to the same results as in the real world clinical trial? So that will be very interesting. It's a very interesting field. And it's, of course, in particular in medical devices, if you have new devices, you want to have as less as possible patients submitting to maybe a new complicated device. And so that's also a goal of in silico planning of trials.
I tend to disagree with you, not disagree with you. I agree with you that you don't want to submit, but a lot of drugs you don't want to submit people to, and yet you do, and have horrible results. So I think the differentiation between the two is not necessarily a good one.
It depends on drugs. It's definitely different. In medical devices, if you have, for example, a heart valve, which you can investigate in
I agree that
in an
it's
animal
good to
model.
do, yeah.
Very exactly. So it depends on the product you're working on.
But just a comment, we should have the authorities to come and ask for this. So
right.
They should put pressure on.
Right, so...
That is one of the ways to go.
Both. patient organizations.
It has to come from private initiatives. I think I agree.
Their interest would be the complete opposite. You know, if the pharma industry actually cuts down on their cost, well, there could be a benefit for the society because the cost of drugs will go down. Do you think that? No, probably not. So the authorities will not be the one that sort of initiate the process for smarter and quicker trials. I just want to have, I think we will hear later on from IBM, who are also located in Oslo Cancer Cluster, you know, looking at the artificial intelligence potential for Watson and other things. This is a typical challenge for Dr. Watson to see if you can combine epidemiology that Anita was telling us about, and then combine everything and see, can you come up with a perfect design in an in silico process? I mean, I don't think that the artificial capability we have has been exposed to such a challenge, but it's an obvious one coming if you see the development in computational biology. So I think this is actually coming, and it's a very interesting topic, and it has to come from industry, so welcome initiatives and thinking around that. Ruth.
I could perhaps just, since I am the moderator, I'm not supposed to be saying too much, but since you did mention IBM, and my colleague will be taking over for the next, moderating the next panel, he might comment on it also. But so there's a lot of challenges for the Watson technology, as you mentioned. Britta did, though, emphasize the fact that within the area of clinical trials, there is already an existing solution today that at least does what I see as a quite important task in helping finding, matching the right patients for the right trials, which ultimately should be benefiting both patients, i.e. population, and of course also the industry. But I agree there's lots of future challenges for the technology.